All right, if you think about it, they survived. They did survive, and it sure beats not surviving. It sure beats losing in Georgia. It sure beats losing in South Carolina, states that were already GOP holds, so they hold on to them. But what is this strategy going forward here for both parties to continue holding on to all the other seats that constitute their majority in the United States House of Representatives and, of course, in the United States Senate? Washington Times columnist Madison Gesiotto, Democratic strategist Richard Fowler. You know, there's a lot of hand-wringing on the part of Democrats, but I also think, you know, Madison, there's a lot of maybe cockiness coming out of Republicans that might be risky here, that they held on essentially to seats they already had. And the margins are closer than they were when these seats were last up for grabs. Now, a lot has changed, I understand that, but I think incumbent upon the voters was this idea that get to work and get this stuff done, right?
Right. I think the one thing that we need to keep in mind here is that we're in a society that's always changing. And so these political parties should never become complacent. No matter how often they're winning or losing, they should continue to change and grow with the times. And so when we talk about needing to win elections, both the Democrats and Republicans need to continue to produce messages and an overall vision that resonates with the American people. When we look at Georgia specifically, Republicans and Democrats poured a lot of money into this election. Specifically, Democrats poured tens of millions of dollars into Ossoff, who ended up losing by 4 points. But that doesn't mean that Republicans should ignore the overperformance of Democrats in multiple special elections, including Kansas, Montana, Georgia, South Carolina. Democrats overperformed by quite a bit from what they were expected to. And so I think going into midterms, Republicans need to keep this in mind because they could lose up to 80 seats if we see 8% overperformance across the board.
All right, what we were showing there was the November 2016 election compared to the special elections between April and May, and of course, just yesterday in South Carolina and Georgia. But, you know, Richard, on to Democrats here. I mean, they might rethink the wisdom of pouring so much money into one race. Now, I know the reasons behind it. It could have been a very big, certainly seminal message and been very frustrating to Republicans and their whole agenda had they pulled it off. But they've still got a lot of vulnerable Republican seats to target. Should they spread the wealth a little for next year?
Thanks for having me, Neil. I think they should spread the wealth. I think if you look at yesterday's results, you saw that in South Carolina, millions weren't spent, and yet still Democrats made huge gains. Here's what our party's got to do. We've got to become more than just the resist anti-Trump party. We have to be a party with a clear message. I think we need to take a page out of Newt Gingrich's book and really come up with our contract for America. What will we do if we are given the keys to the car again?
Well, do you think John Ossoff in Atlanta was too middle of the road, too moderate? There are some passionate liberals who are saying he wasn't Bernie Sanders enough kind of thing.
Well, I don't think he talked about really new ideals. I mean, his campaign was based on being, you know, positive and fiscal responsibility, and I think voters are looking for real solutions because fiscal responsibility doesn't make ends meet at the kitchen table. So I think we have got to become the party for the working family once again, and that requires us to go out there and be bold and say, listen, we will raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. It's bold and say we will offer a health care solution that everybody can afford. Bold in saying that we will be the party for public education and high-quality public schools in every neighborhood, and that is what was missing from this race, is this idea that I don't want to go too far to the left.
All of that, right?
You do got to pay for all of that, but here's the thing. What we're seeing in Washington, if you look at Trump's budget deal, is we're siphoning off all this money to the Pentagon while domestic programs are going to be slashed drastically. Case in point is in the Department of Education, where they're going to take a couple billion-dollar cut, including losing after-school programs and summer enrichment programs and you know.
So we can agree or disagree on that agenda, but you think they have to articulate that kind of thing. It's a fair point. But Madison, one of the things that I always wonder whether Republicans heed is something like history and this notion that victories can be short-lived here. And I think in the case of some of the internal tracking polls that were being done in Georgia, for example, is this expectation that voters had of Republicans to deliver on a failed or at least a stalled agenda. And if they don't, then the same ones who voted for them could just as easily vote against them next go-round.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that goes back to what I mentioned earlier. The parties need to continue to change with the times. They can't just assume that they're going to win a seat because they've won it for 30 or 40 years. You know, look at what happened in 2016 with President Trump. This is something that could happen all the way down to House seats where he's, you know, taking Democrat votes that usually would have gone the other way.
Do you think he was an issue in this race or in this particular Georgia race, not so much?
I don't think so. I think that Karen Handel won because she resonated with the voters in that area. And Georgia 6, I mean, she's someone from Georgia 6. She knows the people of Georgia 6, and a lot more of her donations came from Georgia 6.
What do you think, Richard? Was Trump a factor in this race?
Well, it was very interesting. If you notice in her acceptance speech yesterday, she didn't say the word Trump. She said the President of the United States, and the crowd responded with Donald Trump.
Right.
What Handel was able to do very well is distance herself enough from the President to not take on any of the negatives that he does have. But the one point I want to make here is history has an odd way of repeating itself, Neil. So remember, in 2008, when President Obama won, Democrats won all the special elections in that year after he made his cabinet appointments. And guess what happened? We got walloped in the 2010 midterm election. So this could be, so before, Republicans go and spike the football, not that Madison is, they should pay attention to history. Yeah,
and the same with 2010 when Republicans stormed to take the House. I mean, they thought they were on their way to kicking Barack Obama out in 2012. Didn't happen. Good point all. Thank you both very, very much.